A homeless Navy SEAL spent his last $10 on abandoned junk. Then his loyal K-9 uncovered a secret powerful men would kill to hide. Cole Bennett had lost everything except the retired military dog who had saved his life more than once. When his final $10 bought a forgotten storage unit filled with worthless junk, everyone laughed and walked away. But Atlas refused to leave one battered cedar chest alone. What they uncovered beneath its lid would expose a buried legacy, awaken an entire town, and force one powerful man into the fight of his life. Comment 1 if you'd keep searching for the truth, or 0 if you would have walked away, and tell us where you're watching from. The first snow of October had settled lightly across the peaks surrounding Red Pine, Colorado, dusting the Rocky Mountains with a quiet white glow that made the world look cleaner than it really was. Down below, where the winding highway met the old logging town, life carried on with the slow rhythm of people who measured time by seasons instead of clocks. Pickup trucks rolled through the single main street. Smoke drifted from stone chimneys. The smell of pine mixed with wood smoke and fresh coffee floated through the crisp morning air. Cole Bennett barely noticed any of it. He sat alone on a weathered bench outside the Red Pine bus station, shoulders hunched inside an old olive-green military jacket, whose faded American flag patch had almost disappeared with age. His beard had grown uneven over the past few months. His boots, once polished to inspection standards, were cracked from miles of walking mountain roads. Beside him lay Atlas. The retired military working dog rested quietly, his dark sable coat now streaked with gray around the muzzle. One ear stood alert while the other bore a small notch from a mission years earlier overseas. Even lying still, Atlas watched everything, not nervously, professionally, like a soldier who had never really retired. Cole reached into his pocket. 3 quarters, a nickel, one wrinkled $5 bill, then another. $10. Exactly. He folded the bills carefully and slipped them back into his pocket. "That's breakfast for 2, he murmured. Atlas lifted his head. Cole smiled faintly. "I know." The dog rested his chin on Cole's boot. The pressure was gentle, steady, grounding. It was a signal Atlas had learned long ago whenever Cole's breathing began to change. The nightmares had never truly ended after Cole left the Navy. Some mornings he woke convinced he could still hear helicopters overhead. Sometimes the smell of diesel fuel or fireworks during the 4th of July threw him straight back into places half a world away. Other times there was no trigger at all, only silence. Silence was sometimes the loudest battlefield. Atlas always knew before anyone else. He had saved Cole's life more than once in combat. He had probably saved it even more times afterward. A city bus hissed to a stop nearby before continuing on almost empty. Cole watched it disappear. He had nowhere to go. 3 years earlier, he had owned a ranch just outside town. Nothing fancy. A modest piece of land bordered by pine trees with an old red barn built by his grandfather after returning from Korea. His father had expanded it after coming home from Vietnam. Cole had believed one day he'd pass it to his own children. Instead, medical bills, therapists, prescription medications, failed harvests after months spent unable to work, the mortgage, his father's funeral. Everything had collapsed one payment at a time. Banks never cared why someone stopped paying, only that they did. The ranch was gone. His marriage had ended quietly months before the foreclosure. His wife had tried. She really had. But loving someone fighting invisible battles every single day demanded strength neither of them knew how to find anymore. There had been no screaming, no betrayal, only exhaustion. Sometimes the gentlest endings hurt the most. Atlas stood. His nose lifted into the cold air. The dog's ears turned toward the opposite side of town. Cole followed his gaze. Across the street, A handwritten sign leaned against an old telephone pole. Storage auction today, 10 a.m. cash only. Cole stared for several seconds. Storage auctions. Sometimes old tools, sometimes antique furniture, sometimes absolutely nothing. He looked down at Atlas. What do you think? The dog's tail moved once. Not excited. Interested. Cole laughed quietly. You've got expensive taste for somebody who eats canned food. He scratched Atlas behind the ear before pushing himself to his feet. Come on. The storage facility sat on the edge of town, where the mountains opened into rolling pasture land. Chain-link fencing surrounded rows of faded green storage buildings. Pickup trucks already filled the gravel lot. Men in work boots stood drinking coffee while comparing previous auction finds. Power tools, fishing boats, vintage signs, old motorcycles. One heavy-set man noticed Cole approaching. His eyes drifted from Cole's worn jacket to Atlas. Hope you're not planning to bid, buddy. A few others chuckled. Cole simply nodded politely. I'll look. The man shrugged. Looking's free. Atlas remained close against Cole's left leg. The dog never pulled on the leash, never barked unnecessarily. Years of military discipline still shaped every movement. The auctioneer finally arrived carrying a clipboard. He looked tired. Morning, folks. Metal doors rattled upward one after another. The first unit contained bicycles, sold quickly. The second held restaurant equipment, gone within minutes. The third produced camping gear. Someone celebrated loudly after winning it. Cole kept his hands inside his pockets. $10. That wasn't enough for anything useful. He almost left. Then they reached Unit C-17. The metal door groaned upward. Dust floated through the cold air. Silence. Inside sat what looked like 30 years of forgotten junk. Broken chairs, rotting cardboard boxes, rusted farm equipment, an old dresser missing 2 drawers, bundles of cracked lumber, a warped wooden workbench, stacks of moldy blankets, a battered cedar chest shoved against the back wall beneath cobwebs. Nothing looked valuable. The regular buyers immediately lost interest. Start at 100, the auctioneer called. Nobody spoke. 50? Nothing. He sighed. 25. Still nothing. One bidder laughed. Costs more to haul it to the dump. Another nodded. Pass. The auctioneer rubbed his forehead. $10. The group began drifting toward the next unit before he even finished speaking. Cole looked inside one more time. Worthless. Absolutely worthless. Except Atlas wasn't moving. The dog stood completely still, not sniffing, not pacing, simply staring into the darkness beyond the scattered furniture. His posture changed. Cole knew that posture. He had seen it in Afghanistan. Atlas had looked exactly like that moments before, discovering hidden explosives buried beneath an abandoned marketplace. Every muscle became perfectly still. Eyes locked, breathing slowed, alert, focused. Cole frowned. What is it? Atlas took one slow step forward, then another, stopping exactly at the doorway. His gaze never left the far back corner. The cedar chest. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Anybody? Cole reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the 2 worn $5 bills. His last money. Breakfast. Dinner. Tomorrow. Or something else. He couldn't explain it. Years in special operations had taught him one lesson above all others. When your dog noticed something, you paid attention. Cole raised his hand. I'll take it. Several men turned. One snorted. The homeless guy's buying garbage. Laughter rippled across the gravel lot. "Congratulations," another called. "You just bought yourself a landfill." The auctioneer accepted Cole's money without comment. He handed over a small brass key. "Unit's yours." Cole stared at the key resting in his palm. $10. Everything he had left. One bidder shook his head while climbing into his truck. "Crazy." Another laughed. "Dog probably picked it." Engines started. One by one, the vehicles disappeared down the mountain road until silence settled over the facility again. Only wind moved through the pines. Cole unlocked the storage unit. The metal door screeched upward. A wave of stale air rolled outward, carrying the scent of cedar, old wood, machine oil, dust, and forgotten years. Sunlight stretched across the concrete floor, but reached only halfway inside. Everything beyond remained wrapped in shadow. Cole stood quietly. "What did you see, partner?" Atlas walked past broken furniture, ignored the dresser, ignored the tools, ignored every open box. Without hesitation, he made his way toward the very back. Then he stopped. The old dog sat beside the battered cedar chest. He didn't bark. He didn't scratch. He simply stared at it, waiting. As though someone had once told him that one day, someone important would finally come home. Cole looked around the enormous pile of worthless junk, then back at Atlas. The laughter of the auction crowd still echoed faintly in his memory. But standing there inside the silent storage unit, for the first time in a very long while, he no longer felt like he had reached the end of his road. He felt like he had just stepped onto the beginning of one, and somewhere beneath decades of dust, something was waiting. Not for anyone. For him. Cole stood motionless in the doorway, the brass key still resting in his hand, while Atlas remained seated beside the battered cedar chest at the back of the storage unit. The old military dog's ears were forward, his eyes fixed on the chest with unwavering patience. Outside, another pickup truck rumbled past the storage facility before disappearing down the mountain road. Silence returned, the kind of silence Cole had learned never to ignore. He slowly rolled the metal door all the way open, allowing the bright Colorado sunlight to spill across the concrete floor. Dust floated through the beams of light like tiny drifting stars, disturbed after years of stillness. "Let's see what somebody left behind," he said quietly. Atlas glanced at him but didn't move from the chest. Cole smiled faintly. "You've already picked your assignment." He slipped off his worn backpack and laid it against the wall before beginning with the nearest stack of boxes. The first one collapsed the moment he lifted it. Yellowed newspapers spilled across the floor. Most were over 20 years old. Local headlines, county fairs, snowstorms, football championships, nothing useful. The second box held chipped coffee mugs wrapped in faded towels, old mason jars, bent kitchen utensils, and a rusted cast-iron skillet heavy enough to outlive another generation. He wiped dust from the skillet. "It's still good." He leaned it carefully against the wall. Years of military service had taught him never to throw something away simply because it looked old. Useful things earned respect. The next crate contained worn-out work boots, several sizes, each pair carefully cleaned before being stored. Whoever had packed this place had cared about even the smallest details. That struck him as unusual. Most abandoned units looked like panic. This looked like interrupted purpose. Atlas gave a soft breath but never shifted position. Cole worked methodically. Broken lamps, hand saws, empty tackle boxes, a cracked lantern, old horse tack, boxes of nails sorted neatly into glass jars, an oil can, bundles of rope. Nothing expensive. Nothing anyone at the auction would have wanted. Yet almost everything showed signs of careful maintenance before it had been packed away. He knelt beside an old wooden toolbox. Unlike the surrounding junk, its brass latch had been polished. Inside rested woodworking chisels wrapped individually in cloth. Cole picked one up. The blade still held a razor edge. He turned it over in his hands. Someone had sharpened this not long before everything ended. He remembered another pair of hands doing exactly the same thing. His father's. The Bennett Ranch workshop had always smelled of cedar and linseed oil. Even as a boy, Cole had known where to find his father after school. Not in front of the television, not sitting in town. Always inside the barn workshop. Shavings curled across the floor, while afternoon sunlight poured through dusty windows. His father rarely wasted words. Instead, he taught through work. Sharp tools make calm hands. Measure twice. Slow is smooth. Back then, Cole thought the lessons were about woodworking. Years later, during SEAL training, instructors repeated nearly the same principles using different words. His father had understood discipline long before the Navy ever did. The memory faded as quickly as it arrived. Cole lowered the chisel back into its cloth wrapping. I should have spent more time listening. Atlas looked toward him. Cole knew that expression. Whenever his breathing changed, Atlas noticed first. I'm all right. The dog relaxed again. Mostly. Cole continued deeper into the storage unit. An old military duffel sat beneath a broken chair. He recognized the green canvas immediately. Government issue. Its zipper stuck halfway before finally giving way. Inside lay neatly folded fatigues. Army, not Navy. The name tape had nearly faded away. Only a few letters remained. ARD. There was also a pair of leather work gloves, a canteen, and a photograph tucked inside a notebook. Cole brushed away years of dust. The picture showed 3 men standing beside a half-finished cabin somewhere in the mountains. All were smiling. One of them looked remarkably like his father, 20 years younger. The others were strangers. There was no writing on the back. He slipped the photograph into his jacket pocket. Questions were beginning to outnumber answers. Outside, clouds drifted across the mountains, dimming the sunlight. The storage unit grew cooler. Cole rubbed his hands together before returning to work. Near the back wall stood an old handmade bookshelf. Every shelf had collapsed except one. Books lay scattered across the floor. Most concerned woodworking, furniture repair, forestry, mountain architecture. One title caught his attention. Building with Native Timber. Inside the front cover was a handwritten note. To whoever builds after me, leave it stronger than you found it. No signature. Just those words. Cole closed the book slowly. His father had written messages exactly like that. Never dramatic, never sentimental. Just simple truths. Atlas stood. Cole immediately looked over. The dog wasn't alarmed. He simply walked one slow circle around the cedar chest before sitting again. This time he lowered his nose toward one of the metal hinges. Cole approached. The cedar chest looked older than everything else in the room. Its wood was scarred from decades of use. Its brass lock had turned almost black. Yet something felt wrong. He crouched beside Atlas. What is it? Atlas touched the hinge gently with his nose. Cole leaned closer. Then he saw it. The hinge wasn't rusty. It wasn't even dusty. A faint smear of fresh oil caught the light. He rubbed it between his fingers. Still slick. Impossible. Everything else in the storage unit had collected years of grime. Yet someone had maintained these hinges. Recently. His pulse quickened. He inspected the second hinge. The same thing. Fresh oil. No corrosion. No dust packed into the joints. Who would preserve only the hinges? His military instincts quietly awakened. Details mattered. Little things solved missions. He examined the chest without touching the lid. The wood carried scratches from decades of use. The corners were worn smooth, yet the hinges looked almost new. Someone wanted this chest opened, eventually, but only by someone patient enough to notice. Cole looked at Atlas. "You knew." The old dog blinked slowly, as if the answer had always been obvious. A sudden sharp ringing echoed through the storage hallway. Cole instinctively turned toward the entrance before realizing it was only his old flip phone. Very few people still had the number. He answered. "Hello, Cole?" The voice belonged to Martha Jenkins, the secretary at the Veterans Outreach Office in town. "I've been trying to reach you. I'm here. They approved another counseling appointment if you still want it." Cole looked around the dusty storage unit. He hesitated. "I appreciate it. You don't have to fight everything alone." His eyes drifted toward Atlas. "I know." After ending the call, he slipped the phone back into his pocket. He did want help. He simply wasn't sure where healing actually began. Years of therapy had taught him techniques, breathing exercises, medication schedules, grounding routines. They helped. Sometimes. But standing inside this forgotten storage unit, holding old tools, remembering his father, watching Atlas refuse to abandon a single cedar chest, something felt different, not easier, meaningful. Outside, snowflakes began drifting softly through the mountain air. Cole closed the storage door halfway to keep the cold out. "I guess we're staying a while." Atlas wagged his tail once. Cole laughed quietly. "I figured." He looked once more at the cedar chest, the freshly oiled hinges, the careful craftsmanship. The strange feeling that this wasn't abandoned at all. Only waiting. Waiting for someone willing to look beyond dust. Waiting for someone who still trusted a loyal dog more than appearances. Cole brushed another layer of dirt from the lid. His fingertips stopped over faint carvings almost invisible beneath years of grime. Not decoration. Not damage. Intentional marks. His heartbeat slowed into the steady rhythm he remembered from missions long ago. There was more here. Much more. And whatever story had been buried inside this forgotten storage unit, it had only just begun to reveal itself. Snow drifted lazily outside the half-open storage door, settling over the gravel lot in a thin white blanket. The world beyond the unit had grown quiet. Even the highway seemed farther away now, its distant sounds swallowed by the mountains surrounding red pine. Inside, only the faint creak of old wood and Atlas's steady breathing broke the silence. Cole remained kneeling beside the cedar chest. His fingers traced the shallow carvings worn into the lid. They weren't decorative. They looked almost like tiny measuring marks, too precise to be accidental. Years of military training whispered the same lesson they always had. Slow down. Observe. Nothing important ever revealed itself to someone in a hurry. Atlas stood and stepped closer until his shoulder gently touched Cole's arm. "I know," Cole murmured. "We'll do this your way." He examined the brass lock first. It had long since frozen with age. The keyhole was packed with dust. Whoever had oiled the hinges hadn't bothered with the lock. That made no sense. Unless the lock wasn't supposed to work. Cole reached into the toolbox he had found earlier and selected the smallest flat screwdriver. He carefully cleaned years of dirt from around the brass plate. No hidden screws, no unusual seams, just old hardware. His attention returned to the hinges. Fresh oil, perfect movement. He carefully lifted one side of the lid. Nothing. It barely moved before stopping against the frozen lock. Atlas made a low sound deep in his throat. Not a growl, more like quiet encouragement. Cole leaned closer. There has to be another way. He ran both hands beneath the front edge of the chest. Solid. Then along each side. Nothing. Finally, he reached beneath the decorative wooden trim below the lock. One section shifted. Barely. His heartbeat quickened. There you are. He pressed again. A soft click echoed inside the chest. Small, mechanical, hidden. The brass lock remained untouched. Instead, something released inside the wood itself. Cole slowly lifted the lid. This time it rose effortlessly. The freshly oiled hinges moved without a single squeak. A faint scent of cedar escaped into the cold air. Atlas's ears stood upright. Cole looked inside. Blankets. Only blankets. Heavy olive-drab military wool folded neatly from top to bottom. He blinked, then laughed quietly to himself. I guess you fooled me. He pulled out the first blanket. Army surplus. Probably decades old. The second looked the same. The third smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. Nothing beneath them except more blankets. His shoulders sagged. So that's it. Atlas didn't move. Instead, the old dog stared at the open lid rather than the chest itself. Cole noticed. You've still got something. Atlas stepped forward. Then, with surprising gentleness, he placed one paw against the inside of the raised lid. Not scratching, touching. His nose followed. Cole looked up. The underside of the lid appeared unfinished compared to the polished exterior. Rough cedar, old nail marks, age-darkened wood. Then sunlight shifted through the doorway. A narrow beam struck the inside surface. Something caught the light. Tape. 4 brittle strips of yellowed tape held a flat manila envelope tightly against the underside of the lid. Cole froze. His pulse hammered in his ears. Atlas sat down quietly beside him, as though the dog had been waiting for this exact moment. You weren't guarding the chest, Cole whispered. You were guarding this. His hands suddenly felt unsteady. The envelope looked ordinary. No markings. No labels. Nothing except decades-old tape holding it exactly where someone had intended. He carefully peeled away the first strip. The adhesive cracked with age. The second came free. Then the third. Finally, the fourth. The envelope settled into his hands. It felt almost weightless. He turned it over. Still blank. No name. No address. Only silence. Cole hesitated. For reasons he couldn't explain, opening the envelope felt less like reading a letter and more like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Atlas rested his head lightly against Cole's shoulder. The familiar warmth steadied him. He slid one finger beneath the flap. Inside were only 3 items. The first slipped into his palm with a metallic weight. A small brass key, unlike any house key he had ever seen. Its bow was shaped like a 4-leaf clover. Its shaft was unusually short. Its teeth were simple. Too simple. Almost decorative. He turned it over. No manufacturer. No numbers. No identifying marks. Only years of careful polishing. The second item was folded into a neat square. Heavy drafting paper. Cole unfolded it slowly. A hand-drawn floor plan appeared. It showed a simple rectangle, 10 feet wide, 20 feet long, the exact dimensions of storage unit C-17. Every large object had been sketched with remarkable accuracy. The workbench, the shelving, the cedar chest, even the broken dresser. At the very back wall, however, someone had drawn a narrow, shaded strip that did not exist in the visible unit. A single black X rested near its center. No explanation. No labels. Just the X. Cole frowned. He looked toward the back wall. Solid corrugated steel. Nothing unusual. His eyes returned to the drawing. Whoever had made this wanted him to notice something hidden. The final item was a folded piece of lined notebook paper. His breath caught before he even opened it. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Firm, straight, deliberate. His father's. Cole, if Atlas led you here, you're finally ready. For several long moments, he could not breathe. The words blurred. Not because the ink had faded, because tears had quietly filled his eyes. His father had been gone almost 3 years. 3 years of unanswered questions. 3 years of wondering whether their final conversation had been enough. 3 years of carrying guilt that no counseling session had ever managed to loosen now. His father's voice reached him again, across time, across silence, across loss. Atlas gently leaned against him. Cole closed his eyes. The familiar weight of the old dog's shoulder grounded him before memories could pull him under. His breathing slowed. In, out. Steady. He unfolded the letter completely. There was no more writing, only that single sentence. If Atlas led you here, you're finally ready. Nothing about the key, nothing about the map, nothing about the X. His father had left him a puzzle, exactly the kind he used to build when Cole was a boy, never giving answers, only the first clue. Cole wiped his eyes and studied the brass key again. It doesn't fit the chest. He looked around the storage unit. No visible locks, no cabinets, no padlocks. Nothing. Atlas quietly stood and walked toward the rear wall. He stopped beneath the place marked with the X on the drawing. Then he looked back at Cole, not barking, simply waiting. The old soldier knew another lesson. One mission, one objective, one step at a time. Cole carefully placed the letter back inside the envelope before slipping everything into the inside pocket of his military jacket. His father's words rested over his heart. Outside, snow continued falling across the Rocky Mountains. Inside the forgotten storage unit, the fading afternoon light stretched toward the rear wall where Atlas remained standing. The chest had never been the destination. It had only been the doorway. And somewhere beyond that mysterious X, someone else already knew exactly what Cole was about to find. The realization settled over him like the falling snow outside. His father had hidden something. Atlas had remembered. And if someone else knew enough to leave clues behind, then whatever rested beyond that marked wall was valuable for reasons that had nothing to do with money. Cole folded the hand-drawn map one more time before slipping it into the same pocket as the letter. He looked at Atlas, who still stood facing the rear wall with quiet determination. "We'll figure it out," Cole said softly, "but not by rushing." The old dog glanced back, his tail giving one slow sweep across the dusty concrete. The fading afternoon light reminded Cole that he had nowhere to sleep except wherever the coming night allowed. He reluctantly lowered the lid of the cedar chest. The hidden compartment beneath the lid disappeared once more beneath the rough cedar surface. Everything looked ordinary again. Just another forgotten piece of furniture, exactly as his father must have intended. Cole rolled the storage door closed, secured the lock, and rested one hand against the cold metal. "I'll be back first thing." Atlas waited until Cole stepped away before following him across the gravel lot. The mountains disappeared behind thick gray clouds. Snow continued falling. By dawn, Red Pine looked as though winter had quietly claimed it overnight. Cole woke beneath the covered porch of an abandoned feed store at the edge of town. His sleeping bag had seen better days, but it kept the worst of the mountain cold away. Atlas was already awake. The dog stood facing the eastern horizon, watching, always watching. Cole rubbed warmth into his hands before sharing the last of yesterday's canned beef with Atlas. "You get the bigger half." Atlas accepted it gently. Cole drank cold water from a metal bottle and looked toward town. Another day. Another unanswered question. Less than 30 minutes later, they were walking back toward the storage facility. The snow squeaked beneath Cole's boots. Thin smoke curled from cabin chimneys scattered along the mountainside. People waved as they passed. Red Pine was small enough that everyone noticed strangers, large enough that few asked questions. The storage facility sat unusually quiet. Most renters wouldn't arrive until later. Only one vehicle occupied the parking lot. A black SUV. New, expensive. It looked strangely out of place among the rusted pickups and weathered farm trucks common in Red Pine. Cole slowed. Atlas did too. Without any command, the dog's posture changed. His head lowered slightly, ears forward, eyes fixed. Not aggressive, alert, professional. Someone stepped from the SUV. The man appeared to be in his late 50s. Tall, silver hair perfectly combed despite the mountain wind. A charcoal overcoat fit him as precisely as a tailored uniform. Polished leather shoes somehow remained spotless on the snowy gravel. He carried no umbrella despite the weather. People like him expected storms to move around them. Beside him emerged a woman carrying a slim leather briefcase. Dark blue business suit. Gray wool gloves. Confident posture. Every movement efficient. She surveyed the storage buildings the way an attorney surveyed a courtroom. Cole instantly recognized the dynamic. Leader, advisor, decision-maker, legal protection. Atlas quietly stepped closer until his shoulder brushed Cole's leg. The silver-haired man smiled. Not warmly. Practiced. Mr. Bennett? Cole didn't answer immediately. I am. The man extended one gloved hand. Victor Holloway. Cole looked at the hand but didn't take it. I don't believe we've met. No. Holloway withdrew the gesture without appearing offended. But I know who you are. The woman beside him spoke next. Diane Mercer. She offered only a polite nod. No need for introductions beyond that. Cole studied both faces, expensive clothing, confident expressions. No local rancher dressed this way. No one drove into Red Pine in vehicles like that unless they wanted something. What can I do for you? Holloway glanced toward storage unit C-17. I understand you purchased that unit yesterday. Cole said nothing. It was quite an unusual purchase. So I've been told. A faint smile crossed Holloway's face. I'd like to buy it from you. Cole blinked once. The whole unit. I haven't even cleaned it out. That doesn't matter. Why? Business convenience. The answer arrived too quickly, too smoothly. Cole had spent years reading faces during negotiations overseas. People lying rarely stumbled. Prepared liars rehearsed. This answer had been rehearsed. What kind of business? My company acquires distressed properties. I bought one storage unit. Exactly. Holloway reached into his coat pocket. He removed a plain white envelope. It looked thick. Very thick. He opened it. Inside rested stacks of crisp $50 bills. $50,000. Cole stared without speaking. I'll pay cash. The mountain wind carried silence between them. Finally, Cole asked the only question that mattered. You haven't even looked inside. I don't need to. Then why pay $50,000 for junk? Because removing it would save everyone time. Cole almost laughed. No one spends 50 grand to save time. For the first time, Holloway's smile became slightly thinner. You ask reasonable questions. I learned to. So I understand. Cole noticed something then. Holloway wasn't looking at him anymore. His eyes had drifted toward the storage door. Not casually, carefully, as if measuring distance, estimating possibilities, looking for something. Atlas noticed it too. Without making a sound, the old military dog stepped directly between Holloway and the storage unit. His body remained relaxed. His gaze never left the businessman. Diane Mercer looked down. Beautiful dog. Retired military. I thought so. Atlas didn't move. Holloway studied him. Remarkable discipline. He earned it. So did you. Cole's expression hardened. You've done your homework. I make it my business to know the people I deal with. There it was. Not coincidence. Not convenience. Preparation. Someone had researched him before arriving. You knew I bought this unit. Public auctions aren't private. You knew my military record. Also public. You found me before I even came back this morning. Another small silence. Neither man looked away. Snow drifted quietly between them. Finally, Holloway spoke again. My offer stands. He extended the envelope. Take the money. Cole didn't reach for it. That's enough to buy a new truck. Yes. A place to stay. Yes. Medical care, if needed. Cole thought briefly about PTSD appointments he couldn't afford. About warm meals. A bed. Veterinary care for Atlas as the old dog aged. $50,000 could change everything. Which meant one thing. Whatever Holloway believed remained inside that storage unit was worth far more. Cole slowly shook his head. No. Mercer looked genuinely surprised. You haven't heard the full offer. I heard enough. You don't even know what's inside. Neither do you. Holloway's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. I know enough. Those 4 words lingered in the cold air. Cole caught them immediately. Not I think. Not I suspect. I know. Atlas remained planted between them. His ears flicked once. His breathing stayed perfectly calm. The old dog had judged countless strangers during years of service. Cole trusted those instincts more than his own. I appreciate your interest, Cole said evenly, but the answer is still no. Holloway looked toward the storage building one final time. When he spoke again, his voice remained polite, almost gentle. Mr. Bennett, some things are buried for good reasons. Cole met his gaze. Then maybe it's time someone learned why. For the first time since arriving, Victor Holloway's smile disappeared completely. He slipped the envelope back inside his coat. I'll leave my offer open. I wouldn't. You may change your mind. I won't. Holloway buttoned his overcoat. You've survived difficult situations before. Cole said nothing. I hope this won't become another one. He turned toward the SUV. Mercer followed. Neither hurried. Neither looked back. Moments later, the vehicle disappeared through the facility gate and vanished onto the snow-covered highway. Only after the sound of the engine faded did Atlas relax. The old dog turned toward Cole and gave a soft whine. Cole rested one hand on his neck. I know. He looked down at the folded map inside his jacket, then toward the storage unit. Yesterday, it had been worthless junk. Today, a wealthy stranger had offered $50,000 without stepping inside. The mystery was no longer whether his father had hidden something. The mystery was why Victor Holloway wanted it badly enough to reveal himself before Cole had even found it. And for the first time since buying the forgotten storage unit, Cole realized he wasn't the only one searching. He stood in the falling snow long after the black SUV had disappeared beyond the pines. Atlas remained beside him, watching the empty road where Victor Holloway had vanished. The old dog's ears stayed forward, waiting. listening. Only when the wind carried nothing but the whisper of snow through the evergreens did Atlas finally relax. Cole slipped the brass key, the folded map, and his father's note deeper into the inside pocket of his jacket. Nobody offers $50,000 for garbage. Atlas looked up at him. I think Dad knew someone would come. The dog gave a quiet huff. Cole smiled despite himself. You've always been a terrible liar. He unlocked the storage unit once more, but instead of stepping inside, he paused. His instincts, those sharpened through years of missions where survival depended on noticing the smallest inconsistency, told him something had changed. He scanned the gravel. Fresh tire tracks from Holloway's SUV. His own boot prints. Atlas's paw prints. Nothing else. No one had entered. Still, the feeling remained. Not fear. Observation. Someone had started a game long before Cole ever walked into this place. He rolled the door closed again. Not yet. Atlas fell into step beside him without hesitation. Instead of returning to the unit, Cole headed toward the center of Red Pine. The town looked almost untouched beneath the fresh snowfall. Children laughed outside the small elementary school. A church bell rang once in the distance. Pickup trucks idled outside the feed store, while ranchers discussed weather forecasts that sounded more like family history than science. The smell reached him before the sign did. Fresh coffee, bacon, homemade bread. The Daily Ridge Diner sat on the corner across from the old post office, its weathered wooden sign swinging gently in the wind. Warm yellow light glowed through the windows. Atlas's tail moved once. I knew you'd vote for breakfast. Cole pushed open the door. A small brass bell chimed overhead. Conversation softened for a moment before resuming. The diner felt like another era. Pine-paneled walls, black and white photographs of ranch families, an American flag folded neatly above an old pot-bellied stove, the aroma of cinnamon, coffee, and fresh biscuits wrapped around him like a blanket. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 60s wearing a blue apron dusted with flour. Her silver hair was tied back loosely, and laugh lines framed eyes that seemed to recognize hardship without asking questions. She looked up from pouring coffee. For a brief moment, she stared at Cole, then at Atlas. Her expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Well, she whispered almost to herself. I'll be. Cole frowned politely. Morning. The woman walked around the counter before answering. You must be Cole Bennett. He hesitated. I am. I'm Grace Hollowell. She smiled gently. I've been wondering when I'd finally meet you. Cole blinked. You know me? I knew your father. The words landed with unexpected weight. Atlas quietly walked toward Grace. She knelt despite the stiffness in her knees. The old military dog leaned into her hand without hesitation. Grace's smile widened. I'd know those eyes anywhere. She scratched behind Atlas's ears exactly the way Cole's father used to. You've gotten so gray, old boy. Atlas closed his eyes for a moment. Cole watched silently. Dogs remembered people. Atlas remembered almost everyone. But trust was different. He didn't offer it easily. Grace stood again. You two look frozen. We're all right. Nonsense. She pointed toward a booth beside the window. Sit. Cole instinctively reached for his wallet. I don't have much. I didn't ask. He started to protest. Grace shook her head. If your father walked through that door, he'd tell me to stop arguing and feed you. Cole slowly sat. Atlas curled beneath the table exactly as he had done countless times in military diners overseas. Within minutes, Grace returned carrying 2 steaming plates. Eggs, toast, country potatoes. a bowl of beef scraps for Atlas. Cole stared. I can't pay for this. Grace poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug. Already paid. What do you mean? She sat across from him. Years ago. Cole looked confused. Grace folded her hands. Your father came in here almost every Thursday. I didn't know that. He'd order black coffee. She smiled faintly, and he'd always ask how everyone else was doing before talking about himself. Cole listened quietly. Grace continued. Sometimes he'd leave before sunrise because someone needed a fence repaired, or a roof patched, or a furnace fixed. I thought he just worked around his own place. Grace chuckled softly. Oh no. He worked all over this valley. He never sent invoices. He never asked for recognition. He simply showed up. Cole stared into his coffee. His father had never talked about any of this. Grace watched his expression. You really didn't know, no. He wouldn't tell me much after I came home. Neither of you talked much. The sentence wasn't accusing, only true. Cole looked toward the snowy street outside. We tried. I know. Grace nodded slowly. War changes conversations. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Honest. After a moment, Grace leaned forward. There was one thing your father talked about. Cole looked up. You. He worried? Every day. Grace smiled sadly. But not the way you think. He never questioned your strength. He questioned whether you'd ever believe you deserved peace. Cole swallowed hard. The words struck somewhere deeper than he expected. Grace reached down and rubbed Atlas's shoulder. You know where this fellow slept during your father's illness? Cole shook his head. Right beside his bed. He wouldn't leave. Not for meals. Not for walks. Not even for me. Atlas slowly lifted his head at the sound of Grace's voice. She smiled through moist eyes. The nurses finally stopped trying to move him. They said he seemed to know exactly when your father needed him. Cole felt his throat tighten. I was overseas. I know, Grace answered softly. Your father knew too. He never blamed you. Cole stared at the table. For years he had carried one unbearable thought, that he had arrived too late, that if he had come home sooner, maybe things would have been different. As though sensing the memory beginning to tighten around him, Atlas quietly rose from beneath the table. Without any command, the old dog rested his head across Cole's knee. Pressure, warmth, steady breathing, the familiar grounding routine. Cole closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. One breath, then another. When he opened them again, Grace was pretending not to notice. She simply slid the coffee pot closer. He still watches over you. Cole scratched Atlas gently behind the ears. He always has. Grace looked out the diner window toward the mountains. Your father once told me something. What? She smiled. He said, if Atlas ever leads Cole somewhere, tell him to trust the dog before he trusts himself. Cole froze. Grace looked back at him. He was very serious. He said one day Atlas would know exactly where to go. A chill traveled through Cole that had nothing to do with the winter air. He thought about the cedar chest, the hidden envelope, the map, the brass key, Atlas refusing to leave that forgotten corner of the storage unit. His father hadn't hidden clues for chance. He had trusted one loyal military dog to remember long after he was gone. Grace studied Cole's face carefully. You found something. Cole hesitated. I found questions. She smiled knowingly. Then you're walking the same road your father expected. Outside, a gust of wind swept fresh snow across Main Street. Inside the warm diner, Atlas rested quietly at Cole's feet. For the first time in years, Cole no longer felt as though he was chasing the memory of the man his father had been. Instead, he had begun following the trail his father had carefully left behind, and Atlas had been carrying that trail in his heart all along. The snow had stopped by the time Cole stepped out of the diner. A pale winter sun broke through the clouds, casting long ribbons of light across the streets of red pine. The fresh snow reflected the mountains like polished glass, making the entire valley seem brighter than it had that morning. Grace stood in the doorway holding a fresh thermos. "You'll need this." Cole accepted it. "You've already done enough." She smiled. "I don't think your father would agree." She glanced down at Atlas, and neither would he. Atlas gave her hand one gentle nudge before following Cole toward the storage facility. The walk back felt different. Yesterday, Cole had been searching for anything worth selling. Today, he was following instructions left behind by a man who had somehow trusted the future to an aging military dog. The thought still seemed impossible, yet every clue had confirmed it. The hidden latch, the envelope, the map, his father's handwriting. None of it could be explained away. When they reached Storage Unit C-17, Cole stopped before unlocking the door. He slowly scanned the entire property. Rows of metal buildings, a maintenance shed, security cameras mounted near the office, a lone pickup parked beside another row of units. No black SUV, no sign of Victor Holloway. Still, the feeling remained. Someone was interested. Someone was waiting. Cole unlocked the padlock. The familiar metallic groan echoed as the door rolled upward. Dust floated lazily through the cold afternoon light. Everything sat exactly where he had left it. Atlas entered first. His nose moved steadily through the air before he walked directly to the back wall again. No hesitation. No distraction. Cole closed the storage door halfway behind them. He preferred fewer eyes. Then he removed the folded floor plan from his jacket. He spread it across the workbench. 10 feet by 20. Every object carefully drawn. Every measurement precise. Only one thing remained impossible. The narrow, shaded strip behind the rear wall. He measured the distance with his eyes. Then with his boots, exactly 10 paces from the front. Exactly as shown on the drawing. The wall looked ordinary. Corrugated steel, vertical ribs, paint faded from decades of weather. He knocked gently. Solid. Again. Solid. Nothing suggested empty space beyond it. Atlas quietly pawed the floor. Not the wall. The floor. Cole looked down. The dog scratched once, then stopped. Not there? Atlas shifted 2 feet to the left, scratched again. Cole crouched. Concrete. Old. Cracked in places. Nothing unusual. His eyes returned to the brass key. Grace's words echoed in his mind. Trust the dog before you trust yourself. He picked up the key again. It still bothered him. The teeth were too shallow. The shaft too short. It simply didn't look functional. Unless... His father's note. If Atlas led you here, you're finally ready. Not. Use this key, open this lock, find this door. Only, you're ready. His father expected him to solve it, not follow instructions. Cole smiled despite himself. Still teaching. He laid the key gently across the map, then froze. The clover-shaped head matched a small symbol drawn beside the mysterious X almost perfectly. He hadn't noticed it before. The drawing wasn't showing a key. It was showing its shape. The key wasn't meant to turn. It was meant to measure. His pulse quickened. He carried both map and key to the rear wall. Holding the paper against the metal, he aligned the floor markings with the actual dimensions of the unit. Then he placed the brass key over the small symbol. Perfect fit. The shaft pointed directly toward one narrow seam between two corrugated panels, barely visible. Cole ran his fingertips along the seam. Nothing. He tried again, this time slower. Near waist height, his fingers caught on something almost invisible. A tiny circular depression no larger than the tip of a pencil, hidden beneath years of dust. He brushed it clean. Not a screw, not rust, a precisely drilled hole. His heartbeat became steady. Mission breathing. Focus. Observe. Act. He inserted the narrow shaft of the brass key. It slid only halfway. No farther. Wrong. He removed it. Looked again. Atlas watched quietly. Cole noticed something else. The clover-shaped head wasn't centered. One side extended slightly farther than the others. He rotated the key 1/4 turn, inserted it again. This time, click. Not loud. Just enough. Something moved inside the wall. Atlas immediately stood. His tail lifted. Cole carefully pressed against the metal panel. Nothing happened. He frowned. Another puzzle. His father rarely built mechanisms requiring only one action. He looked lower, near the floor. Another tiny hole. He inserted the key there. Another click. Then, a deep mechanical thud echoed somewhere behind the wall. Dust drifted from above. Cole stepped backward, slowly, almost silently. An entire section of corrugated steel shifted outward less than an inch. Hidden hinges, perfectly concealed. He gripped the edge carefully. The panel swung open. Cool air flowed from the darkness beyond. Dry. Still. Carrying the scent of cedar, machine oil, old leather, and freshly cut pine. Cole stared. There really was another room. Atlas walked forward without fear. The opening revealed a narrow wooden staircase descending beneath the storage unit. No concrete. No exposed pipes. Someone had built this space carefully, beautifully. The walls were lined with old pine boards. A single battery-powered lantern hung at the bottom of the stairs, long dead but still neatly mounted. His father hadn't hidden a compartment. He had built an entire workshop beneath the storage unit. Cole switched on the small flashlight clipped inside his backpack. The beam swept downward. Shelves, benches, tools, rows upon rows of carefully organized wooden boxes. Everything remained exactly as though someone had simply stepped outside for lunch. Not abandoned. Waiting. Atlas descended first. His paws made almost no sound on the wooden steps. At the bottom, he stopped. Not because of fear, because he had reached the place he had been trying to bring Cole all along. Cole followed slowly. The workshop stretched nearly the entire width beneath the storage unit. Heavy timber beams supported the ceiling. Every tool hung in perfect order. Hand planes, carving knives, clamps, mallets, files, chisels polished until they reflected the flashlight. Along the far wall stood shelves filled with dozens of handcrafted wooden boxes. Cherry, walnut, oak, maple. Everyone different, everyone beautifully made. Small brass plates had been attached to each lid. Each plate carried an address, and beneath it, a person's name. No prices, no dates, only names. Cole moved closer. He read one aloud. Margaret Collins. The next. Thomas Reed. Another. The Alvarez family. Every box belonged to someone, not merchandise. Something else. On the workbench lay folded American flags protected beneath clean linen cloths. Nearby rested carved eagles, wooden crosses, small memorial plaques. Half-finished projects waited exactly where their maker had left them. The room felt alive despite years of silence. Cole slowly removed one leather-bound journal from the workbench. Before he could open it, Atlas growled, low, sharp, different from before. Not memory, warning. The old dog turned toward the staircase. Every muscle in his body became rigid. Cole immediately switched off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the workshop. Then, from somewhere above, very faintly, came the sound of footsteps crossing the concrete floor inside storage unit C-17. Someone else had entered. Cole didn't move. Years of training took over before conscious thought could catch up. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. Every sense sharpened. Atlas stood perfectly still beside the staircase, his eyes fixed on the darkness above. The old military dog wasn't barking. That worried Cole more than barking ever could. Atlas only stayed silent when silence offered the greatest advantage. Another footstep. Slow, measured. Not the hurried pace of someone breaking in. Someone was looking. Cole gently closed the leather-bound journal and laid it exactly where he had found it. He swept the flashlight beam once around the hidden workshop before switching it off again. Darkness swallowed everything. The faint scent of cedar and machine oil filled the underground room. Cole leaned close to Atlas. Stay. The command was barely more than a whisper. Atlas remained rooted beside the stairs. Cole quietly climbed 3 steps until he could see a narrow strip of daylight through the concealed doorway. A man's shadow stretched across the floor of the storage unit. The figure paused. Cole heard slow breathing, then the scrape of a boot against concrete. Another pause. The stranger wasn't searching randomly. He seemed to know exactly where he wanted to stand. A flashlight clicked on. Its beam swept across the scattered furniture, across the broken dresser, across the workbench, across the cedar chest. It stopped there. Cole's pulse remained steady. The stranger walked closer. The flashlight lingered on the chest for several long seconds before moving away again. The man muttered something under his breath, too quietly to understand. Then another sound reached Cole. A phone. Yeah, the voice was low. Male. No. He hasn't found it. Cole's eyes narrowed. The stranger continued. I checked. Another pause. No signs. More silence. I'll call if anything changes. The call ended. The flashlight switched off. Several seconds later, the footsteps retreated. The storage door rolled upward. Cold wind rushed inside. Then came the metallic rattle as it closed once again. Silence. Absolute silence. Cole waited another full minute before climbing out of the hidden room. Atlas followed without needing another command. Cole carefully examined the storage unit. Nothing appeared disturbed. The cedar chest remained exactly where he had left it. The hidden wall had not been discovered. But now there was no doubt. Victor Holloway hadn't simply made an expensive offer. He had people watching. Cole slowly rolled the storage door open. Outside, the facility appeared quiet. Only one man stood near the office. Frank Doyle, the storage manager. Frank was in his early 60s with heavy shoulders and a weathered face that looked permanently tired. He wore insulated coveralls and held a snow shovel loosely in one hand while pretending to clear the walkway. Pretending. The shovel hadn't moved in several minutes. When Frank noticed Cole looking toward him, he quickly bent to scrape at the snow. Too quickly. Cole walked over. Morning. Frank looked up. Oh. Morning. Everything all right? Frank forced a smile. Sure. Cold one today. It is. Neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Cole asked quietly, Has anyone been inside my unit? Frank hesitated. No. You sure? Another pause. Only you. Cole watched his eyes. Frank wasn't practiced at lying. His gaze drifted left. His jaw tightened. Tiny signals. Nothing dramatic. Just enough. Somebody was in there. Frank lowered the shovel. I don't know anything about that. You don't? The older man sighed. I didn't say that. Cole waited. Frank looked around the empty facility before stepping closer. I shouldn't even be talking to you. Then why are you? Frank rubbed both hands together against the cold. Because your father would have wanted me to. Cole felt something tighten inside his chest. You knew him. Knew him. Frank gave a quiet laugh. Your father saved my ranch. Cole frowned. I thought he was just a carpenter. He was. And a mechanic. And a welder. And the kind of man who showed up whenever somebody else ran out of hope. Frank stared toward the snow-covered mountains. 12 years ago, my barn roof collapsed under heavy snow. I'd already lost 2 harvests. The bank was days away from taking everything. I couldn't afford repairs. So your father drove out. Didn't ask for money. Didn't ask for credit. He simply unloaded his truck. What happened? He rebuilt the roof. Frank smiled faintly. Told me to help the next man when my feet were steady again. Cole looked away. None of this sounded like the father he thought he knew. Or perhaps the father he had never truly taken the time to understand. Frank cleared his throat. Yesterday. Cole looked back. The man in the expensive SUV. You know him? I know who he works for. Holloway. Frank nodded. He owns half the valley now. He stopped by before you arrived this morning. What did he want? Frank hesitated again. He asked questions. About me? About the unit. What kind of questions? Frank looked genuinely uncomfortable. If anybody had gone inside, if anything unusual had been found, if the auction paperwork had been completed. Cole remained silent. Frank lowered his voice. I told him I didn't know anything. Did he believe you? I don't think he cared. Cole folded his arms. Why tell me now? Frank looked directly into his eyes. Because your father once told me. The older man's voice softened. That if anything ever happened to him, and if a man named Victor Holloway started asking questions, I was supposed to make sure you weren't standing alone. Cole stared at him. My father knew Holloway? Frank slowly nodded. He knew enough. Enough about what? Frank's shoulders slumped. I honestly don't know. I never asked. He told me some things were safer if fewer people carried them. Atlas quietly walked over and sat beside Frank. The older man smiled sadly before scratching behind the dog's ears. You remember me? Atlas leaned gently against his leg. Frank looked at Cole. He did this every Thursday. What? He waited outside while your father rented this storage unit. Cole blinked. My father rented C-17? For years. He was always carrying lumber, boxes, sometimes finished carvings, sometimes nothing. Frank looked toward the building. I figured he was just storing furniture. I never questioned it. Cole turned slowly toward the storage unit. The hidden workshop. The shelves. The names. His father hadn't stumbled upon the place. He had built his life around it. Frank's expression darkened. Listen carefully. Cole faced him again. Holloway doesn't usually come himself. So why today? That's exactly what worries me. The old manager glanced toward the highway. If he's showing his own face, whatever's inside that unit matters more than money. A cold wind swept across the parking lot. Atlas suddenly stood, his ears turned toward the road. Seconds later, a black SUV appeared briefly between the pine trees before continuing past the facility without slowing. Cole recognized it immediately. Victor Holloway hadn't gone far. He was still watching. And for the first time since this strange journey had begun, Cole realized finding his father's hidden legacy might be the easiest part. Protecting it would be the real mission. Cole stood in the middle of the snow-covered storage yard, watching the black SUV disappear around the bend until it vanished behind a stand of towering ponderosa pines. Only then did he release the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Atlas remained beside him, every muscle relaxed now that the vehicle was gone, but his eyes never stopped scanning the road. The old dog had seen enough danger in his lifetime to understand one simple truth. Some enemies announced themselves. Others smiled first. Cole looked toward Frank Doyle. You said my father rented that unit for years. Frank nodded slowly. Nearly every week. He never missed more than a few days. What did he build? I honestly don't know. Frank's weathered face tightened with regret. I respected his privacy. He always locked up before leaving. I never once stepped inside. Cole glanced back toward storage unit C-17. I think he wanted it that way. Frank hesitated before reaching into the pocket of his heavy work coat. He removed a small brass key attached to a faded leather tag. This opens the maintenance gate behind the property. Cole looked at it without taking it. Why are you giving me this? In case you ever need another way out. Cole finally accepted the key. I have a feeling, Frank said quietly. You're going to. Snowflakes drifted lazily between them. Neither man spoke again. Atlas gently nudged Cole's hand. It was time to move. The hidden workshop felt different now. Not mysterious. Important. Cole carefully closed the concealed wall behind him before switching on a battery lantern he found resting neatly on one of the shelves. To his surprise, the lantern still worked. A soft amber glow filled the underground room. For the first time, he could truly see it. Every inch reflected discipline. Tools hung in perfect alignment. Shelves were labeled in careful handwriting. Wood species occupied separate racks. Even jars of screws and nails were arranged by size. His father hadn't simply built this place. He had lived by it. Atlas walked slowly through the workshop, sniffing each corner with quiet familiarity. At one workbench, he stopped and rested his nose against a worn leather apron hanging from a wooden peg. Cole smiled. So this is where he stood. The dog wagged his tail once. Cole stepped closer. The apron still carried faint traces of cedar dust embedded deep into the leather. Beside it rested a pair of safety glasses, a sharpening stone, a coffee mug with dried rings still staining the bottom. It looked as though the craftsman had planned to return the following morning. Instead, time had simply stopped. Cole sat at the workbench and carefully opened the leather-bound journal he had picked up earlier. The first page wasn't a diary. It was a list. Names, addresses, dates, small handwritten notes. December 4th. Repaired porch steps for Mrs. Wilson. Wouldn't accept payment. Ask about her grandson's deployment next spring. January 18th. Finished walnut memory box for Sergeant James Carter's family. Play Amazing Grace. March 7th. Roof repairs at the Henderson Ranch. Need volunteers before next snowfall. Cole turned another page, then another. Every entry followed the same pattern. Not business. Service. No invoices, no profits, no prices, only people. Dozens. Hundreds. The farther he read, the more one truth became impossible to ignore. His father had spent years quietly helping anyone who needed him. Veterans, widows, farmers, teachers, families. No publicity, no recognition, just work. Atlas rested quietly beside the chair. Cole reached down and scratched behind his ears. You knew all this. The old dog looked up. For a brief moment, Cole imagined Atlas sitting patiently beside his father at this very workbench while another memory box slowly took shape beneath careful hands. His chest tightened, not from grief alone, from realization. He had spent years believing his father died with little to show for a lifetime of hard work. He had been completely wrong. The legacy had simply been hidden. Hours passed unnoticed. Outside, daylight faded. Inside, Cole continued reading. One journal became 2, then 3. Certain names appeared repeatedly. Grace Hollowell, Frank Doyle, Dr. Emily Carson. Families throughout the valley. Some entries included sketches. Others contained measurements for handcrafted boxes. Several mentioned military unit insignias carefully carved into walnut or cherry wood. Then, one page made Cole stop breathing. It wasn't the handwriting. It was a phrase. Protect those who cannot repay you. His father's handwriting faded into another memory entirely. Years earlier, Afghanistan. Their commanding officer standing before the platoon before sunrise. You aren't here because it's easy. You're here because someone else cannot protect themselves. Cole closed the journal. The workshop disappeared. Dust became desert. The warm lantern became burning sunlight. Somewhere far away, rotor blades thundered overhead. Gunfire echoed through narrow streets. A child crying. Radio chatter. Smoke. His breathing became shallow. His hands trembled. Atlas was there instantly. The old dog placed both front paws gently against Cole's knees. Pressure. Steady. Grounding. Cole stared at him without truly seeing. Atlas leaned closer until his nose rested against Cole's chest. One slow breath, then another. Cole felt rough fur beneath trembling fingers. The workshop slowly returned. Lantern light. Cedar. Snow tapping softly above the hidden ceiling. Atlas. Always Atlas. I'm here. Cole whispered the words aloud. I'm here. The panic slowly loosened its grip. He rested his forehead against the dog's. You never stopped bringing me home. Atlas licked his hand once. Mission complete. Again. Later that evening, Cole resumed reading. Toward the back of the 4th journal, the handwriting changed. The entries became shorter, more cautious. Several names were written in red instead of black. Then he found the first mention of Victor Holloway. No explanation, only a sentence. Holloway buying valley properties through shell companies. Families frightened. Need proof before acting. Cole sat upright. He turned the page. More notes. Property maps. Survey numbers. Dates. Another sentence. Never keep originals together. If anything happens, Atlas knows where to begin. Cole slowly lowered the journal. His father hadn't merely suspected something. He had been investigating it. For years. A quiet knock echoed above. 1, 2, 3. Atlas stood instantly. His ears lifted. Cole quietly extinguished the lantern. Darkness returned. Neither moved. The knocking came again, this time softer, almost polite. A familiar voice drifted faintly through the floor. "Cole?" "Grace." He recognized her immediately. "You down there?" Cole blinked. She knew. He carefully reopened the concealed wall and climbed into the storage unit. Grace stood inside holding a paper bag that smelled unmistakably of fresh biscuits and beef stew. She smiled the moment she saw him. "I figured you'd forget to eat." Cole laughed softly. "I almost did." Her eyes moved around the storage unit before quietly settling on the slightly disturbed dust near the hidden entrance. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she handed him the bag. "Your father used to do the same thing." "What? Skip meals whenever he got focused?" She glanced at Atlas. "So I'd bring dinner to both of you." Atlas wagged happily. Grace smiled. "I thought he might remember." Cole accepted the warm bag. "Thank you." She looked directly into his eyes. "You're starting to understand him." "I think I am." Grace nodded. "Then don't stop now." She turned toward the door before pausing. "Oh." She looked back over one shoulder. "I saw Victor Holloway's SUV parked outside town this afternoon." Cole's expression hardened. "He hasn't left Red Pine." Grace's smile faded. "I don't think he plans to." When she was gone, silence settled over the storage unit once again. Cole looked toward the concealed workshop hidden beyond the false wall. The journals no longer felt like old notebooks. They felt like unfinished orders. His father's final mission had never ended. It had simply waited for the next man willing to carry it. Cole stood alone in the quiet storage unit long after Grace had gone. The paper bag of warm food rested untouched on the workbench. Atlas lay nearby, his head on his paws, watching Cole with the patient calm that had carried them through deserts, mountains, and the long years after the war. Outside, evening settled over Red Pine. Snow reflected the pale moonlight, and the storage facility became little more than rows of silent shadows beneath the towering pines. Cole looked once more toward the concealed doorway behind the false wall. His father had left behind more than memories. He had left responsibility. That realization weighed far heavier than any backpack Cole had ever carried. He climbed back down into the hidden workshop. The lantern cast a warm amber glow across the wooden shelves, making the room feel less like a hiding place and more like a chapel built for quiet work. Atlas padded behind him and settled beside the workbench. Cole picked up another journal. Its leather cover had softened with years of use. Inside, every page carried the same careful handwriting. Every entry told a story. Not of war, not of business, of people. He began reading again. April 12th. Mrs. Evelyn Carter. Front porch repaired after spring storm. Refused payment. Accepted one blackberry pie. Her grandson leaves for Marine Corps boot camp next month. Pray for him. June 3rd. Jacob Mills. Wheelchair ramp completed. Needs wider doorway before winter. Ask Frank if he can help next Saturday. September 27th. Gold Star family. Delivered maple memory box. Mother cried before opening it. Stayed until she smiled. Some grief cannot be repaired. Only carried. Cole closed his eyes. His father hadn't been keeping records for himself. He had been keeping track of people. People who needed someone. People who might otherwise be forgotten. He opened another journal. This one contained sketches. Beautifully drawn plans for handcrafted keepsake boxes. Each design was unique. Some featured carved mountains. Others displayed soaring eagles. Several incorporated military insignias. Every drawing carried a handwritten name. No two boxes were alike. His father had made each one for a specific person. Atlas quietly rose and wandered toward the shelves. He stopped before one particular walnut box. The brass plate read, Margaret Henderson. Cole carefully lifted it down. The workmanship was extraordinary. Smooth corners, hand-cut joinery, tiny brass hinges polished to a mirror finish. He gently turned the winding key beneath it. A delicate melody filled the workshop. Soft, gentle, almost fragile. It echoed against the pine walls until even Atlas lifted his head. Cole listened without moving. Somewhere deep inside the music, he could almost hear his father's steady hands shaping the wood. He slowly closed the lid. A folded envelope rested beneath it. He unfolded the note. For Margaret. When memories become too heavy, let this little song carry them for a while. Samuel Bennett Samuel. His father's full name. Cole smiled sadly. You never signed anything, he whispered. Except this. The following morning arrived clear and bright. Sunlight sparkled across fresh snow as Cole walked into town, carrying one leather journal wrapped carefully inside his backpack. Atlas trotted beside him. People greeted them as they passed. Not because they knew Cole well, because everyone knew Atlas. Children waved. Older veterans nodded respectfully. Several ranchers bent down to scratch the old dog's ears. Cole noticed something he had missed before. His father hadn't been the only person Atlas remembered. The town remembered Atlas too. The Daily Ridge diner buzzed with breakfast conversation. Grace looked up the moment they entered. You found something. Cole sat quietly across from her. Without a word, he slid the journal onto the table. Grace opened it slowly. Her fingers trembled. After reading only 2 pages, tears gathered in her eyes. Oh, Sam, she whispered. You impossible man. Cole waited. Grace smiled through the tears. He never told anyone. Told us what? She turned another page. He organized volunteers. What volunteers? Everyone. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, retired veterans. If somebody needed help. He quietly found people willing to give it. She looked at Cole. We all thought we were helping one neighbor at a time. Her voice grew softer. I never realized someone was keeping the whole quilt stitched together. Cole thought about that. A quilt. Separate pieces becoming something stronger together. Grace reached another page. Her smile widened. Oh. What? Here's mine. She laughed quietly. February 18th. Grace Hollowell. Heating system failed. Refused repayment. Collect through kindness. Grace wiped away another tear. I never paid him back. Cole shook his head. I don't think he wanted you to. She closed the journal carefully. No. He wanted me to help someone else. She looked around the diner. Every occupied booth suddenly seemed connected. Mrs. Lawson near the window. Old Bill Harper reading the newspaper. The retired school principal enjoying coffee with 2 volunteer firefighters. Grace slowly whispered, I wonder. Before she could finish, the front bell rang. An elderly rancher entered carrying a weathered cowboy hat. Grace smiled. Morning, Walter. Walter removed his gloves. Then he noticed the journal. His expression changed. Where'd you find that? Cole looked up. You recognize it? Walter nodded immediately. Sam carried one exactly like it. He approached slowly. Grace handed him the journal. Walter opened it carefully. His rough hands paused over a page. His eyes widened. That's my place. He pointed toward an entry. June 11th. Walter Briggs. Fence repaired after wildfire. Need stronger posts before elk season. Walter laughed softly. I always wondered who fixed the south pasture while I was in the hospital. He looked at Cole. Your father wouldn't let me thank him. Another page. Another memory. Another smile. Within minutes, Mrs. Lawson stood. What are you all looking at? Grace handed her the journal. Then another customer joined. Then another. Soon half the diner surrounded the worn leather book. Every few pages someone recognized a name, or a story, or an act of kindness. Quiet conversations filled the room. I remember that. He built our porch. He fixed our church roof. He made my grandson's toy train. He carved my husband's memorial flag case. The journal had become something unexpected. A mirror. One by one, people began seeing themselves reflected inside it. Cole watched silently. His father had never spoken about any of this. Yet the valley had been carrying pieces of his work for years. Grace looked at him. They need to see the rest. Cole hesitated. There are dozens of journals. Then we'll read everyone. Walter nodded. So will I. Mrs. Lawson smiled. Count me in. Others agreed, one after another, without speeches, without plans. Simply because it felt right, Atlas watched the growing circle of neighbors quietly. His tail swept once across the wooden floor. Cole looked around the diner. Only days earlier he had believed he was completely alone. Now, he wasn't so sure. Outside, beyond the frosted windows, a black SUV rolled slowly past the diner. It never stopped. It didn't need to. Victor Holloway had seen enough. Inside, the town had begun remembering, and that was exactly what he had been trying to prevent. Victor Holloway did not slow the black SUV as it rolled past the front windows of the Daly Ridge diner. He didn't need to. One glance through the glass told him everything. People were gathered around the leather-bound journal. They were talking, pointing, remembering. He continued driving without expression, but his fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Across the table inside the diner, Grace quietly closed the journal. We can't pretend this stays hidden anymore. Cole nodded. I know. Walter Briggs leaned forward, resting both weathered hands on the table. If Sam spent years writing these books, there'll be people all over this valley who deserve to know what he left behind. And there'll be people who don't want them to know, Cole answered. Silence settled over the group. Nobody questioned who he meant. Grace looked toward the window. Holloway. Cole followed her gaze. The SUV was gone. But he'll be back. The afternoon sky darkened as another storm rolled over the mountains. By the time Cole and Atlas returned to Storage Unit C-17, thick clouds had swallowed the sun. The temperature dropped sharply. Atlas paused before entering. His ears lifted. Cole immediately stopped. What is it? The old dog sniffed the cold air. His attention shifted toward the far end of the storage yard. Nothing moved. Still, Cole trusted him. He slowly scanned the property. Frank Doyle stepped out of the office carrying a clipboard. The storage manager's face looked more worried than tired now. He crossed the lot quickly. Cole, what happened? Frank glanced toward the road before speaking. I've had visitors. Holloway? Frank nodded. And 2 county officials. Cole frowned. What did they want? They asked for inspection records. Inspection records? They said there were concerns about structural safety. Cole looked toward his unit. They've never inspected these buildings before. I know. Frank lowered his voice. They also wanted to know exactly when your rental paperwork became active. Cole understood immediately. They're looking for a legal way inside. Frank sighed. I think so. He handed Cole a folded document. I made a copy before they left. Cole opened it. Notice of Emergency Structural Review. The wording sounded official. Too official. The inspection was scheduled for the following morning. That's fast. Too fast. Frank rubbed the back of his neck. I've worked here 18 years. We've never had an emergency inspection. Cole folded the notice. They're creating pressure. Frank nodded. And pressure makes people make mistakes. Cole smiled faintly. Not always. Frank looked at Atlas. I suppose you two know something about that. Inside the storage unit, Cole carefully rolled the metal door shut. Atlas walked directly to the hidden entrance. The dog no longer hesitated. This underground workshop had become familiar territory. Cole descended the wooden stairs carrying 3 journals and the inspection notice. He spread everything across the workbench. The lantern cast warm light over the room. Outside, the first snowflakes began falling again. He opened another journal. Unlike the earlier ones, this volume contained maps. Property boundaries. Hand-drawn survey lines. Creeks. Forest roads. Old ranch names. Some parcels had been circled in red. Several bore one familiar name. Holloway. Again and again. Cole unfolded one larger map. Beneath it rested a sealed envelope. His father's handwriting covered the front. Land records. Only if necessary. Cole stared at it. He resisted opening it immediately. Instead, he studied the maps first. Every marked property belonged to families Grace had mentioned at the diner. Walter Briggs, the Hendersons, the Millers, the Collins family, dozens of longtime residents. His father hadn't simply repaired their homes. He had been documenting something connected to their land. Atlas suddenly stood. Cole looked up. The dog wasn't facing the stairs. He was looking toward a shelf along the eastern wall. A shelf Cole hadn't examined closely yet. What did I miss? Atlas walked over. He gently touched one small wooden box with his nose. Cole lifted it down. Unlike the others, this one carried no brass nameplate. Only a carved mountain silhouette across the lid. He opened it. Inside rested an old compass. Beneath it lay another folded paper. Not a letter. A list. Volunteer contacts. Builders, mechanics, veterans, doctors, teachers, firefighters. Beside every name was a handwritten checkmark. At the bottom, his father had written, "Never try to carry a mountain alone." Cole slowly smiled. Even now, his father had been teaching him. A mission wasn't won by one soldier. It was completed by people willing to stand together. Atlas rested his chin on Cole's knee. "I hear you," Cole whispered. "We're going to need help." By evening, the storm had intensified. Wind rattled the metal walls overhead. Snow piled against the storage doors outside. Cole finally climbed back into the main unit. Frank waited beside the office holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "I figured you'd still be here." Cole accepted one gratefully. "Thanks." Frank leaned against the doorway. "I made a few calls." "What kind of calls?" "Old friends." Cole looked at him. "People your father helped." Frank smiled. "They remember." Cole thought about the volunteer list hidden below. His father had already built the team years ago. He simply hadn't lived long enough to call them together one last time. A pair of headlights appeared beyond the entrance gate. Not the black SUV this time. A white county pickup. It drove slowly through the facility before stopping near the office. Two men climbed out wearing county jackets. One carried a camera. The other held a clipboard. Frank quietly muttered, "They're early." One official approached. "Evening." Frank answered politely. "What can I do for you?" "Just taking preliminary photographs before tomorrow's inspection." Cole stepped forward. "Why?" "Routine." The official avoided eye contact. Cole noticed the camera never photographed any other unit, only C-17. Atlas moved silently beside Cole. The old dog didn't growl. He simply watched. The photographer hesitated for the briefest moment before lowering the camera. Animals often recognized tension before people admitted it existed. After several awkward minutes, the county truck drove away. Frank watched until its taillights disappeared. They weren't inspecting. No. Cole answered quietly. They were confirming. Confirming what? That I'm still here? The wind howled across the valley. Snow swirled beneath the security lights. Frank folded his arms. What are you going to do? Cole looked toward storage unit C-17, then toward the mountains rising beyond Red Pine. His father's journals, the hidden workshop, the names, the maps, the people beginning to remember. He finally answered, "The same thing the teams always taught us." Frank waited. When somebody starts rushing you, Cole looked down at Atlas. It's because they're running out of time. Atlas lifted his head toward the dark highway, far beyond the falling snow. A pair of headlights had stopped, watching, waiting. The hunt had entered a new phase. This time, Cole intended to be ready. The storm arrived before midnight. Wind swept down from the Rockies with a force that rattled every sheet of corrugated steel in the storage yard. Snow spiraled beneath the security lights until the entire property disappeared behind a curtain of white. Inside Unit C-17, Cole sat on an overturned wooden crate with Atlas sleeping lightly beside him. Neither of them truly rested. The journals lay stacked neatly inside waterproof canvas bags. The maps had been rolled and tied with leather straps. Every memory box remained exactly where Samuel Bennett had placed it. Nothing would leave this workshop without purpose. Cole checked his watch. 2:14 a.m. His military instincts whispered that people who planned to take something rarely arrived in daylight. Atlas's ears twitched. His eyes opened. The old dog slowly lifted his head. Cole noticed immediately. What is it? Atlas stood without making a sound. He faced the storage door. His posture stiffened. Not alarm. Detection. Cole extinguished the lantern beneath the workshop before climbing quietly into the main unit. Darkness wrapped around him. Outside, an engine idled. Not one vehicle. 2. Headlights remained off. Only the low rumble of diesel engines drifted through the snow. Cole moved silently to the narrow gap beside the storage door. 2 pickup trucks rolled slowly between the rows of units. No company logos. No county markings. The lead truck stopped 3 buildings away. 4 men climbed out wearing heavy winter jackets. None spoke. Each carried a flashlight. One man unfolded papers from a waterproof folder. Cole watched them point toward C-17. Atlas released the faintest growl. They're here. The men approached. One stopped outside the unit. Another examined the padlock with a flashlight. A third spoke quietly. I don't like this. The tallest answered. Orders are orders. Cole recognized neither voice. Then another vehicle entered through the front gate. Bright headlights flooded the lot. The pickup trucks immediately backed away. The four men hurried inside. The new arrival pulled directly beside the office. Frank Doyle stepped out carrying a flashlight and wearing his heavy ranch coat. "What are you boys doing here?" One of the strangers answered quickly. "County inspection." Frank didn't move. At 2:30 in the morning? Silence. The tallest man folded the paperwork. "We'll come back." Frank looked toward the retreating trucks until they disappeared into the storm. Only then did Cole quietly open the storage door. "You all right?" Frank nodded. "I figured they'd try something." "You expected this?" "I've lived around powerful people long enough." Frank managed a tired smile. "They never like waiting." Cole looked toward the road. "They'll come back." "I know." Frank handed him a folded newspaper. "Look at tomorrow's front page." Cole frowned. The paper had already been printed. The headline read, "County to Condemn." Aging storage facility demolition expected. Within days, Cole looked up. "They're moving faster." Frank nodded grimly. Somebody wants this place gone before anyone asks questions. Morning came wrapped in gray clouds. Word spread quickly through Red Pine. People began arriving before sunrise. Grace carried fresh coffee. Walter Briggs brought sandwiches. Several retired veterans quietly parked nearby. None carried signs. None shouted. They simply stayed. Cole noticed something else. Every person who came had appeared somewhere inside Samuel's journals. The volunteer list had begun assembling itself. Grace looked toward the gathering crowd. He'd be smiling. Cole nodded. I think he already knew. Atlas wandered among the people. Children patted his scarred shoulders. Older veterans saluted him with quiet respect. The old military dog accepted every greeting before returning faithfully to Cole's side. Near noon, another black SUV entered the facility. Victor Holloway stepped out wearing the same immaculate overcoat despite the snow. Diane Mercer followed carrying a leather portfolio. Neither looked surprised by the gathering crowd. Holloway smiled politely. "Mr. Bennett?" Cole remained calm. "Mr. Holloway, I see you've become popular. I've met some neighbors. I imagine you have." Mercer opened the portfolio and removed a thick document. "My client would like to resolve this matter privately." She handed the folder to Cole. Inside rested a formal agreement, a cashier's check. $5 million. Cole stared silently. Grace stepped closer but said nothing. Walter looked over Cole's shoulder. Even Frank seemed unable to hide his surprise. $5 million. Enough to buy a ranch. Enough to rebuild a life. Enough to provide the best PTSD treatment available. Enough to guarantee Atlas every medical procedure he might someday need. Holloway spoke softly. "You deserve a fresh start." Cole continued reading. In exchange, all journals, all maps, all handcrafted boxes, complete confidentiality, permanent non-disclosure, no copies, no public statements. Everything disappeared forever. Atlas quietly placed his head against Cole's leg. The familiar weight steadied him. Cole looked down at the old dog. Scars crossed Atlas's muzzle. Gray fur surrounded tired eyes that had watched over him through firefights, nightmares, hospitals, homeless shelters. And now this. $5 million could buy comfort. It could never buy back truth. Cole slowly closed the folder. Holloway waited. So? Cole handed the agreement back. No. The single word hung in the cold mountain air. Holloway's smile faded. You should think carefully. I already have. Your future is standing in your hands. Cole looked toward the workshop hidden beneath the storage unit. My future was standing here long before I arrived. Mercer's professional composure slipped for the first time. You don't understand what you're refusing. Cole smiled quietly. I think I finally do. Holloway took one slow step closer. Money solves problems. Cole shook his head. It solves prices. He looked directly into Holloway's eyes. My father taught me there's a difference. Silence settled across the gathering crowd. Grace wiped away a tear. Frank lowered his head. Walter smiled beneath the brim of his hat. Atlas remained perfectly still. Victor Holloway studied every face surrounding the storage unit. Not fear, not anger. Resolve. People who had remembered something worth protecting. For the first time since arriving in Red Pine, he understood the obstacle standing before him wasn't one former Navy SEAL. It was an entire community. Without another word, he accepted the folder from Mercer. The black SUV slowly pulled away. Nobody celebrated. Nobody cheered. They simply watched until it disappeared beyond the falling snow. Cole looked down at Atlas. You picked the right mission. The old dog leaned gently against his leg. Far beyond the mountains, unseen by anyone gathered there, federal investigators were already reviewing documents quietly submitted by an anonymous source the previous evening. The first pieces of Samuel Bennett's hidden evidence had begun reaching people who could no longer ignore them. The truth was finally moving, and this time, no amount of money would be enough to bury it again. Spring arrived quietly in Red Pine. The snow retreated from the valley floor one slow day at a time, revealing green pasture beneath the melting drifts. Creeks that had slept beneath ice began running again, carrying mountain water through fields where wildflowers pushed toward the sun. Life returned to the valley. So did hope. The federal investigation unfolded over the following months with far less drama than most people expected. There were no television helicopters circling overhead, no shouting crowds, no dramatic arrests in the town square. Instead, investigators patiently followed the trail Samuel Bennett had documented years before. The journals, the survey maps, property records, witness statements. Every page fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting for someone willing to finish it. Victor Holloway's development company became the subject of multiple investigations involving fraudulent land acquisitions, intimidation of property owners, and the destruction of historical records connected to several ranches throughout the valley. The evidence spoke more clearly than anger ever could. Cole never celebrated. His father hadn't gathered proof to destroy a man. He had gathered it to protect families. That difference mattered. Grace reminded him of it often. Justice isn't revenge, she said one afternoon, while pouring coffee into familiar ceramic mugs at the diner. It's making room for people to breathe again. Cole simply nodded. He understood now. For years he had believed winning meant defeating an enemy. His father had lived by another definition. Winning meant making sure someone else could stand back up. The storage unit no longer looked forgotten. Volunteers arrived almost every day. Frank Doyle organized shelves. Walter Briggs repaired the old loading ramp. Local electricians rewired the hidden workshop safely, while retired carpenters restored the worn benches without changing Samuel's careful layout. Nobody rushed. Nobody tried to erase the past. They restored it. The concealed workshop beneath Unit C-17 became the heart of something entirely new. The hand tools remained exactly where Samuel had left them. The journals occupied a climate-controlled cabinet built by local volunteers. The handcrafted memory boxes that had not yet found their families stayed on their shelves, waiting patiently. Above the entrance, someone carved a simple wooden sign. Bennett Mountain Veterans Workshop built to serve, still serving. The day the sign was raised, nearly the entire town gathered, There was no ribbon cutting, no speeches. Grace simply placed one hand on the old cedar chest. He started this. She looked at Cole. You'll carry it. Cole rested his own hand beside hers. No. He smiled quietly. We all will. Around him, heads nodded. The quilt Samuel had spent decades stitching together had not unraveled after his death. It had simply needed someone to recognize the pattern. Atlas spent most mornings lying in a patch of sunlight near the workshop door. Age had slowed him. His muzzle had turned almost completely white. The scar across his shoulder remained visible beneath thinning fur. He slept more than he once had, but every visitor still received the same careful inspection before being welcomed inside. Old habits never truly left military working dogs. Neither did loyalty. Cole had changed too. The nightmares still came. Some nights they arrived without warning. Rotor blades, smoke, voices calling over broken radios, faces he still carried. PTSD had not disappeared. It never promised to. But now, when sleep shattered before dawn, Cole no longer wandered the mountains alone. He walked into the workshop. He sanded rough boards smooth. He carved names into walnut. He repaired broken keepsake boxes. Atlas always followed. Sometimes healing wasn't found by escaping the memories. Sometimes it came from placing steady hands back to meaningful work. One bright afternoon in early summer, Dr. Emily Carson stopped by after finishing her rounds. She knelt beside Atlas for his regular checkup. Your heart's still strong, old soldier. Atlas responded by licking her hand once. Emily smiled at Cole. He reminds me of veterans I treat. How? They don't stop serving. They just find different uniforms. Cole looked toward the workshop where two younger veterans were teaching high school students how to build birdhouses for elderly residents. I think you're right. Emily scratched behind Atlas's ears. And I think he knows it. Weeks became months. Families continued arriving after hearing stories passed from neighbor to neighbor. Some came searching for memory boxes Samuel had built decades earlier. Others simply came looking for someone willing to listen. No one left empty-handed. Sometimes they received a handcrafted keepsake. Sometimes help repairing farm equipment. Sometimes only coffee and conversation. Often, that was enough. Late one September afternoon, just as golden light spilled across the Rocky Mountains, an old pickup pulled uncertainly into the gravel lot. The engine sputtered before finally going silent. A young man climbed out. He couldn't have been older than 26. His backpack was faded. His boots were worn through at the toes. Everything he owned appeared to fit inside one duffel bag. He stood motionless beside the truck, unsure whether to approach. Cole watched from the workshop doorway. He recognized the posture immediately. Not because the young count looked like him, because years earlier, he had stood exactly the same way, someone carrying far more weight inside than anyone could see. Before Cole could speak, Atlas slowly rose. His movements were careful now, measured. Age showed in every step. Still, he walked directly toward the stranger. The young veteran knelt automatically. Atlas stopped in front of him. Without hesitation, the old dog gently placed one weathered paw across the toe of the young man's boot, exactly as he had once done for Cole during the darkest days after the war. The young man's shoulders began to shake. He buried both hands gently into Atlas's gray fur. I don't know where else to go, he whispered. Cole walked over quietly. You found the right place. The young veteran looked up. I heard veterans worked here. They do. I don't have any money. Cole smiled. Neither did I. Silence lingered between them. Not awkward. Understanding. Cole picked up a smooth block of maple from the workbench. He placed it gently into the young man's hands. "We start with this." The young veteran stared at the unfinished wood. "What do I make?" Cole glanced toward Atlas. The old dog had already curled into his favorite patch of afternoon sunlight, watching them through tired but peaceful eyes. Something for someone who needs hope. The young man nodded slowly. "I think I can do that." Cole looked across the workshop. Veterans worked beside ranchers. Teenagers learned from retired carpenters. Grace poured fresh coffee while Frank laughed with Walter over a crooked shelf they pretended not to blame on each other. The journals rested safely nearby. The cedar chest remained where everything had begun. Samuel Bennett's mission had never been about hiding treasure beneath a lid. The treasure had always been people willing to carry one another. Outside, the sun settled behind the Rocky Mountains, painting the valley in deep gold and quiet blue. Atlas closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, the old military dog looked completely at peace. Cole rested one hand gently on his loyal friend's shoulder. "You brought me home again." Atlas's tail tapped softly against the wooden floor. Once. Then again. The workshop doors remained open as evening settled across red pine. Ready for the next veteran, the next family, the next burden too heavy to carry alone, because worth had never been the same as price, and the greatest inheritance had never been hidden beneath the lid of a forgotten cedar chest. It had always lived inside ordinary people choosing, one quiet act at a time, to never let another soul stand alone. If you believe loyalty and doing the right thing still matter, type yes in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And if stories about justice, courage, and ordinary Americans standing their ground speak to your heart, we'd be honored to have you subscribe and join us for the next journey.